There is a unique heartbreak in classic car ownership, selling a troublesome old machine for pocket change, only to watch it transform years later into a priceless collector's item. In the British automotive world, this story plays out constantly. Cars once dismissed as unreliable or outdated are now commanding breathtaking sums at international auctions. Today on UKTorque, we are counting down 10 British classic cars people deeply regret selling, uncovering the flaws that drove owners crazy back then and the incredible value they hold today. Number 10. Lotus Esprit Early Series. The Bond car cast aside. When the early Series 1 and Series 2 Lotus Esprit burst onto the scene in the 1970s, it looked like a spaceship. With its razor-sharp, Italian wedge body pinned by Giorgetto Giugiaro, it instantly captured the world's imagination, most famously transforming into a submarine in the James Bond classic, The Spy Who Loved Me. On paper, it was the ultimate British supercar, light, mid-engined, and handling corners with the precision of a genuine racing car. But for the everyday enthusiasts who bought them secondhand in the late 80s and 90s, the dream quickly turned into a mechanical nightmare. The early Esprits were plagued by notorious reliability issues. The 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine was highly strung, prone to overheating, and the inboard rear brakes were a mechanic's worst nightmare to service. The build quality from the Norfolk factory was highly inconsistent at the time. Cabin materials would degrade rapidly, and the electrical systems seemed to possess a mischievous mind of their own. Frustrated by mounting garage bills and the constant anxiety of a breakdown, many owners sold their Esprits for shockingly low prices. Throughout the 1990s, you could easily pick up an early Esprit for less than the price of a used family hatchback. Today, those exact same early series cars are revered as pure, unadulterated design masterpieces. Collectors are actively hunting for unmodified, original Series 1 and 2 models, and prices have skyrocketed into six-figure territory. Those owners who sold their Esprits just to get rid of a lingering headache are now watching those wedge-shaped silhouettes roll across elite auction blocks, wishing they had just kept the garage door locked and waited. Number 9. Jaguar XJ Series 1 and 2. The stately icon ruined by reality. Sir William Lyons achieved something truly magical when he launched the original Jaguar XJ6 in 1968. It was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most beautiful and refined executive saloons the world had ever seen. The ride quality was revolutionary. It glided over imperfections on the road with an eerie silence that shamed cars costing 3 times as much. Combined with the legendary XK inline-six engine, the XJ offered sports car performance in a velvet glove. However, as these magnificent machines aged into the late 1970s and 1980s, they ran directly into the darkest days of British Leyland's industrial chaos. The Series 2 models, in particular, suffered terribly from inconsistent assembly standards. But the real enemy of the Jaguar XJ was rust. British steel of that era was notoriously poor, and without modern rust proofing, the elegant wheel arches, floor pans, and sills of the XJ would dissolve into orange dust at the mere sight of rain. Combined with complex Lucas electrical faults that could baffle even professional engineers, the XJ rapidly transformed from a symbol of high society into a financial black hole. By the late 1980s and 90s, second-hand Jaguar XJs were worth next to nothing. They were bought by banger racers, or simply left to rot in the corners of scrapyards because fixing a single major electrical or structural issue cost far more than the entire car was worth. Today, finding a solid, unrusted Series 1 or early Series 2 XJ is an incredibly rare privilege. The motoring world has remembered just how groundbreaking these cars were, and values are climbing rapidly. Those who practically gave away their elegant Jaguars to escape a repair bill are now filled with deep regret, realizing they parted with one of the finest driving experiences Britain ever engineered. Number 8. TVR Tasmin / Wedge Series. Blackpool's misunderstood weapon. In the early 1980s, TVR decided to completely break away from its traditional, rounded design language. The result was the Tasmin, the opening chapter of the famous TVR Wedge series. It was bold, uncompromising, and unashamedly aggressive, featuring a sharp, angular fiberglass body, pop-up headlights, and a trailing-edge rear window that looked like nothing else on British roads. Equipped with a variety of power plants, ranging from the reliable Ford Cologne V6 to the roaring Rover V8, the Wedge series offered phenomenal performance and a visceral, loud, and direct driving experience. It was a sports car built for true driving purists who didn't want electronic driver aids interfering with their fun. Yet, as the years rolled on, the TVR Wedge developed a daunting reputation. The fiberglass bodies, while immune to rust, were sitting on steel chassis outriggers that were highly vulnerable to corrosion. Even worse, the electrical wiring inside these hand-built cars was notoriously chaotic. Dashboard gauges would fail, pop-up headlights would get stuck in mismatched positions, and fuel injection systems on early models could be incredibly finicky to tune. As a result, during the 1990s and early 2000s, the market completely turned its back on the Tasmin and its V8 brothers. They became incredibly cheap, often traded among enthusiasts for minimal sums, and many were neglected or broken up for parts. But the passage of time has been incredibly kind to the TVR Wedge. In a modern world filled with sanitized, digitally controlled sports cars, the raw, mechanical honesty of the Tasmin series has become incredibly desirable. The striking 1980s aesthetic is now celebrated as a classic design statement. Those who sold their Wedges out of frustration are now kicking themselves, realizing they traded a wild, irreplaceable piece of Blackpool magic for pennies. Number 7. Daimler V8 250, the thinking man's Jaguar. To the untrained eye, the Daimler V8 250 looks identical to the iconic Jaguar Mark II saloon, the quintessential British bank robber car of the 1960s. But beneath that familiar, curvaceous sheet metal lay a completely different and arguably superior heart. While the Jaguar version utilized the heavy XK inline-six engine, the Daimler was blessed with a magnificent, compact 2.5-liter V8 engine designed by Edward Turner. This engine was an absolute gem. It was constructed with light alloy cylinder heads, making it significantly lighter than the Jaguar powerplant. This completely transformed the car's dynamics. The Daimler V8 250 had a much lighter front end, resulting in sweeter, sharper handling, while the V8 engine itself delivered power with a silken, turbine-like smoothness and a subtle, sophisticated exhaust note that was completely unique. Despite its brilliance, the Daimler was historically overshadowed by its Jaguar sibling. For decades, classic car buyers ignored the Daimler badge, viewing it as the more conservative, elderly cousin of the aggressive Jaguar Mark II. Because of this lack of prestige in the secondary market, values of the Daimler V8 250 remained stagnant and depressed for a very long time. Many owners, tired of maintaining the complex twin-carburetor V8 setup or dealing with the inevitable body rust, parted with their Daimlers for very modest sums, thinking they would never be worth serious money. That assumption was a massive mistake. Today, the classic car community has finally woken up to the engineering genius of the Daimler V8 250. It is now recognized not just as a rebadged Jaguar, but as a more refined, sweeter-handling executive express. Prices have surged dramatically, leaving former owners to deeply regret selling what was secretly one of the best-engineered British saloons of the entire post-war era. Number 6. Ford Escort 2 Malawian Quatches, the working-class hero turned blue-chip asset. There was a time in the late 1970s and 1980s when you could not walk down a single street in Britain without seeing a Ford Escort Mark II. It was the absolute backbone of British motoring. From basic two-door popular models driven by students, to practical estates used by tradesmen, and the legendary RS models dominating the rallying world, the Escort was everywhere. It was simple, rear-wheel drive, incredibly easy to fix, and completely ubiquitous. Because they were so incredibly common, nobody in the 1980s or 90s ever thought of the standard Escort Mark II as a future investment. They were treated as disposable transport. When they got old, they were modified, driven into the ground, used for amateur motorsport, or simply sent to the crusher when rust took hold of the floorboards. Thousands of working-class motorists sold their trusty Escorts for a few £100s just to upgrade to newer, front-wheel drive hatchbacks like the Ford Fiesta or Sierra. What followed is one of the most astonishing price explosions in automotive history. As the generation that grew up with the Escort Mark II reached retirement age, a powerful wave of nostalgia took over the market. People desperately wanted to buy back their youth. Today, a standard clean, two-door Ford Escort Mark II shell is worth thousands of pounds on its own. If you're lucky enough to own a genuine RS, 2000, or Mexico, you are sitting on a serious financial asset that can easily command tens of thousands of pounds at auction. The ordinary family car that people practically threw away is now a blue-chip classic, leaving an entire generation of British motorists deeply wishing they had just held onto their keys. Number 5. Sunbeam Rapier Fastback, the forgotten Grand Tourer. The Sunbeam Rapier Fastback, introduced in the late 1960s under the Roots Group and Chrysler banner, was a beautiful attempt to bring American-style pillarless coupe glamour to the British motoring public. Often referred to as the Alpine Coupe, its styling was directly inspired by the classic Plymouth Barracuda, featuring a sweeping, dramatic roofline, a spacious interior, and a wonderfully distinctive wraparound rear window. It was a highly capable Grand Tourer, offering a smooth ride, a reliable 1.7-liter engine, and an optional overdrive system that made motorway cruising an absolute pleasure. Yet, despite its elegant proportions and genuine long-distance comfort, the Sunbeam Rapier suffered from a massive image problem as it entered the used car market. It fell between two stools. It wasn't a raw, lightweight sports car like a Triumph GT6, nor was it a conventional family saloon. Consequently, it was quickly forgotten by the mainstream classic community. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, the Rapier Fastback became an endangered species. Because values were so incredibly low, owners refused to invest money into repairing the inevitable body rust or sourcing increasingly rare trim pieces. Many were simply scrapped or used as donor cars. Owners practically gave them away, glad to be rid of a car that the market seemed to have completely rejected. Today, however, the incredible rarity and gorgeous, pillarless fastback lines of the Sunbeam Rapier have made it a highly sought-after collector's item. Its distinctive 70s style stands out dramatically at any classic car show, and finding a survivor is incredibly difficult. Those who let their Rapiers go for nominal sums now realize they parted with one of the most stylish and exclusive British coupes of its generation. Number 4. Triumph Dolomite Sprint, the 16-valve secret. In 1973, Triumph pulled off an absolute masterstroke of engineering with the Dolomite. For its sheer, unyielding durability, it was an incredibly tough car. The mechanicals were so simple they could be serviced using a basic set of hand tools in a suburban driveway. For over a decade, it served as the ultimate dependable family anchor across Britain. Because the A60 Cambridge was the absolute definition of an ordinary, everyday appliance, it received zero respect in the used car market during the 1980s. Thousands of families literally abandoned them or sold them for nominal amounts just to clear space for modern hatchbacks. Even worse, because of their immensely tough mechanical structure and heavy steel bodies, the A60 Cambridge became the absolute favorite target for banger racers across the UK. Hundreds of perfectly good Cambridges were deliberately smashed to pieces on oval racing tracks for weekend entertainment. This widespread destruction decimated the surviving population. Today, seeing an Austin A60 Cambridge in pristine condition triggers an overwhelming wave of pure nostalgia for a simpler era of British motoring. Values have risen significantly as people desperately search for this definitive piece of cultural history, leaving those who sold their family Cambridges for scrap value to deeply regret losing a faithful old friend. Number 1. Rover P4, the solid sovereign of Solihull. We arrive at our number 1 choice, a car that embodies the absolute pinnacle of traditional British solid engineering values, the Rover P4. Produced from 1949 all the way through to 1964, the P4 was affectionately known as the Annie Rover. It was a car chosen by the pillars of British society: doctors, lawyers, bank managers, and high-ranking government officials. The build quality was legendary. The doors closed with a heavy, vault-like thud. The interior was a sanctuary of thick leather, real polished wood trim, and wool carpets. It featured an incredibly smooth engine and a chassis that felt absolutely indestructible. It even featured a highly distinctive central third headlight on early models, earning it the famous Cyclops nickname. But as the 1970s and 1980s arrived, the automotive landscape shifted dramatically toward lightweight, aerodynamic designs. The heavy, dignified Rover P4 suddenly looked like an antique from a bygone era. Younger drivers found the heavy steering and traditional styling completely unappealing. Consequently, values plummeted to rock bottom. Beautiful, mechanically perfect Rover P4s were traded for minimal sums, often sold to people who simply wanted a cheap, heavy car to drive into the ground or use for spare parts. Owners let them go without a second thought, assuming that a car so deeply rooted in the past would never find a place in the future. They cannot have been more wrong. Today, the classic car world looks back at the Rover P4 with immense respect. In an era where modern cars feel increasingly plastic and disposable, the heavy, handcrafted, over-engineered majesty of the P4 has become incredibly precious. Clean, running P4 models are now highly prized assets, leaving those who sold their Rovers for pocket money to face the ultimate, bitter regret of letting a true British sovereign slip through their fingers. The history of these 10 cars proves that value isn't always measured in immediate numbers. Sometimes, the car you are fighting with today is secretly a future masterpiece waiting for its time to shine. Subscribe to UKTorque for more untold stories from automotive history. And tell us in the comments, have you ever sold a classic car that you bitterly regret letting go today?